Hey everybody, Scout Crafty here again. Thank God it's Friday. Made it through another week. Today we're going to do something a little bit different. We have a good friend of the show by the name of Mason Alvarez, who's been following for a long time. And a few months ago, he lost a good friend of his who, at 17 years old, a young man by the name of Jared. And Jared loved tape measures. And Mason asked if we could do something in his memory and Jared's memory about the tape measure. So we're going to do that today. Everything you ever wanted to know and didn't want to know about the humble tape measure. Now, when you typically think of a tape measure, a lot of times people think of something like this, something that a tailor would use, because that's originally what a tape measure was. It was like a tape with a graduated markings on it. It came in very handy, still does. Then they went on to these surveyor's rulers, which was a steel tape with the markings on here. And here are these are two old vintage examples, and then we have its modern equivalent, of course, made of plastic. But you know, you can see here, if you step on this, it's going to crack. Something like this will last, as it has, 100 years. Now, many early builders and carpenters would use these cloth tapes like this. They would come in 50, that's a 100-foot reel. And basically how you would use these is you would pull them out like this, and it had a fiberglass or a cloth or a heavy-duty tape in here. And they were very rugged, and they were marked off in 1 foot, and then you would get to 2 foot. And from here, you can see this is 2 foot 2 inches, things like that. They were really useful. And to reel them up, all you would do is you just flip out that little handle and roll it right up. And these were good for many years, and they still are. They're still handy. And like I said, here's a 50 and 100 foot. Now, I apologize for the lighting. I am at a different location. But here we see some of the earlier tape measurers, and remember what I was telling you, they go way back. Here's a very early Stanley, and you can see with this one here, you just pull the tape out like this, and you would push it back in. There was no spring return on this. And another interesting thing is these older tape measures like this, you would pull them out. They were steel tape, but you would wind them up just like the old ones, you know, using this wind lever, and wind them back. And that's the way a lot of these older ones were. Then they went into the spring return. Now we get to the mid-1800s. They started making the spring return. It was basically a steel tape measurer. You could see here, steel tape, and it had a little button on the side that would return the tape into the housing. These were very popular, and remained so until they came out with the design that we're very familiar with today, the shape that we are. And they had a lot of holsters that they would come with and whatnot. This one had the early feature, the locking feature, which is pretty rare. And you could see here that it was a white tape, a white steel tape. Now, if you notice, a lot of these tapes, the average length was about 8 foot or so because of the technology, the spring technology. This one here is another 8-footer. And you know, when you would pull this out like that, a lot of times they would get damaged if you kept pulling them out to their full extension rate. So you would try and get a tape measure that you were going to use and stay within the limits. A lot of the features you see on today's tape measures you think are new, but they actually go way back. Like they started using plastic cases back in the late 40s and early 50s. They experimented with different types of plastic. Here's one from France that's pretty interesting because it has a window on top. And if you were getting close to a wall, and let's say you were here, you pull it out and you look 5 inches, and you see you add 2, so you get 7 inches because you always add for the base. So that was pretty interesting. Had a window on top that you could see through. But they were trying to come out with all different features because you could see there were so many different makes and models of tape. Now, before we get to the newer tape measures, I just wanted to clear up a couple features of the tape measure that pretty much carries over. You'll see this one here, you'll see always the tip will move a little bit. That tip is supposed to move the thickness of this here so that when you butt it up against something, you'll get the same reading as if you pull it apart, as if you go off the edge. That's why this moves a little bit. It's usually the same thickness as the thickness of that steel. Another feature you'll notice here, if you notice on the tip, there's a little slot there. That slot is to fit in the head of a nail. If you wanted to take a reading, you can bang a nail into there, and then you could slip this over the head of the nail, and that will give you a good reading from that nail on. Next, we come up to every foot. You'll see that there's a marking here. It's 12 inches, 1 foot, and then we go to 2 foot, and you'll see another. It's the arrow up here. Next up, you'll see this little every 16 inches will be 2 arrows like this. This is for basic when you're doing your studs on a normal wall. They're usually 16 inches apart. However, there are some walls that they go a little further apart. For example, if you go here, a little over 19 inches, you'll see that little diamond. That's if you wanted to, in the same 8-foot span, instead of having 7 boards, if you went here, you would only use 6 boards. And if you went to 24, you'll see there's another double arrow. That's if you're building something that's like a shed or a garden, building that you don't need to have the same structural load. You can use 24 inches on center, and that will save you another. There'll only be 5 boards in an 8-foot span. So that's what those usually on every modern tape measure, you'll see those. Next up on the bottom of every tape measure, you usually see something like here that says 3.5 inches with 2 arrows. Over here, this one says 2.5 inches. See it? 2.5 inches. And this one here on the front of it, it says add 2 inches. Now, basically what that means is when you are measuring let's say you're going to a wall, like this was a wall, and you had a measurement, when you pulled this out like this, if you saw it said 6 inches, you would add 2 more inches to this point. That would give you 8 inches. That would be your length. So all tape measures usually have that. Next up, depending on the tape measurer, some will have more of a drastic curve than others. Like this Milwaukee has a tremendously drastic curve, and the reason is so that you can stick this tape measure out longer without it folding over. It's self-supporting up to a certain amount of feet, let's say 8 feet or something, before it'll bend over and fold. Whereas if the curve isn't so pronounced, it won't be able to go out of the tape measure without folding over. So if you're a carpenter, you might want to look into that. Now here's some examples of some modern tape measures. About 10 years ago, there was an explosion on the market for tape measures, and they were all trying to outdo each other. And let me go over some of these and show you some of the features that I think are good to have, and others that I say are not so much. And I've had a few to compare, so let me give you my opinion. All these choices, how do you pick one out? Well, this is how I go through it. This is my process of elimination. Being that I tried out all these tape measures, I have some that are my favorite. This is my go-to. This is the one been using for practically half my life. And what I like about this, it's a lever lock, which means it's already locked. So when you pull it out, it stays exactly where it is. You don't have to do anything. You pull it, it stays where it is. When you want to retract it, you squeeze this little lever lock in the bottom, and that brings the tape back in. To me, that's genius. I don't want to pull a tape out and then have to push this down to lock it. I'm already pulling it out. Just leave it stay there. This is just something I shouldn't have to do. That's just me personally. Secondly, a lot of times, depending on what you're using it for, a lot of times the graduations, what kind of graduation? Some people want metric, and they want standard on top. Some people only want metric. Some people want, there are different tapes. There are a bunch of different tapes. Some have the graduations written in there instead of just lines. So that's another thing you have to go for. Weight. These new ones that were really popped, these things weigh a ton. Now, I know if you're a carpenter or something like that, you might need something like this, but for the average homeowner, these things are just so heavy, So I do like something that, like for example, with the Stanley lever lock, this one has that feature I was telling you about, that when you pull out the tape like this, it stays there until you push the bottom, So I personally, I like a nice gimmicky tape. This old Earl lock-and light. This thing lit up the blade. So when you did this, it had some lights in here that would shine here so you could see it. Total gimmick. And not only that, you can't change in the battery. It was such a hassle because when you take this thing apart, it's like it's not easy to change the bulb, the battery. Obviously, it's burnt out like anything else battery would be. So this was a gimmick. A lot of the companies started to make chrome looking. They're really not metal. A lot of them are just chrome plated plastic, but they wanted that retro look. And this one here, Lufkin's it's a good example of that. And you can see here, this one has the inches and the centimeters on the bottom, so it's both metric and standard. Again, if you want, but it's got the button. So for me, I never, that's just this one here. They have they say a high visibility blade. So you're thinking, wow, look at that. They put the way they have it in there, like with the little hologram, you say that must be nice. But when you open up the blade, it looks pretty similar to almost all the other blades, the high visibility. Yeah, they painted it in a bright yellow. But what is interesting about this one, on the back here, it has a vertical ruler. So, but, there is a tremendous curve to it. So I don't know how and it has the magnetic tip, which some people would look for. But, again, heavy. So you have to decide, is that good for you? Now we're getting down to my favorites. This here, I thought it was a gimmick when I first got it. It's a centering tape measure, and it's not a gimmick at all, because when you pull this out here, you can see the numbers. When you take a measurement, let's say you measure 8 inches, you look on the bottom, it tells you exactly what half is. So it's really good. It's written out. If it was 6.5 inches, you can see 3 1/4. Everything, and it works really good. And I'm telling you, it's not a gimmick. A centering tape measure, good to have. Okay, last up. I hope this makes sense to some of you, because I'm trying to explain it and I'm having a rough time. But tape measures were never felt right to me, and that's why I have so many. I'm always looking for the right one, because every time I want to measure something, I'm right-handed. So if I pull it over here like this and lock it down, I want to mark something, I got to let go of the tape with my hand. The tape is always falling over, and try and mark it with my right hand, correct? Because I'm righty. Unless you want to try and mark it with your left hand, and the spaz factor kicks in. So what I did was I looked around, and sure enough, they make a left-handed tape measure, which is just right for me. And that is, when I pull the tape out like this, I can mark it, because now all these bottom numbers are for, they say left-handed, but it's total natural for me. I can mark it here like this. And I'm still holding the tape with my left hand, which feels comfortable. So I never understood it. Most of whenever I'm measuring, I like to put it to the right, pull it this way, and mark it this way. And usually I would do it like this, but I work it upside down. Have you ever done that? You're working the tape upside down. If you have, you understand. If not, maybe I've been doing it wrong my whole life. But a left-handed, or this is ambidextrous, it has the numbers both top and bottom for whichever side. But I do like this type of tape measurer. Anyway, sorry for rambling so much. I hope you enjoyed the presentation. Thanks so much for tuning in. Have a nice weekend. Bye-bye.